But today I'd like to take a quick look at De Bellis Antiquitatis, and this is version 3, and it's a hardback, which is very nice. And considering the previous editions of these rules, it's very nice. A little background for myself is that I've been playing this game since the very beginning, since it first came out, which is version 1. And I have a copy of that somewhere laying around, but I could not find it. But if we look at some of the previous editions, this one, for instance, right here is version 1.1, which I did have. And you can just get an idea what it was like back then. Very few pages of rules. The bulk of it was army lists. You can tell by that one of those is an army list. Very short and brief. There was no descriptions, just there's the army's name, its number, and what it contains, and that's about it. So yeah, that was version 1.1. And we had version 2.0, which added a little color cover, which was nice. A little bit thicker. More army lists, a little more details. Well, actually not a whole lot more detail in the lists. They're pretty much the same thing, just the number and the contents of each list. And again, that made up the bulk of the rule book. You can see I used this quite extensively. Of course, all those notes and changes and errata that were going on. After this came version 2.2, which is still played today, actually. I did have a copy of that, but I sold mine. I began playing other things, so I didn't pay attention. But once DBA 3.0 came out, it sounded pretty intriguing. There was a lot of new things going on with this book, not to mention the fact that it's a hardcover. Get all excited, oh my God, they got color pictures in the back, but that's the only color you'll see in this book, unfortunately. But that's okay. Most DBA players aren't put off by that. But anyway, let's take a look at this bad boy and see what we're looking at. Okay, like I said, it's a hardcover. It's about 142 pages. The pages are pretty thick and sturdy. A little gloss to them, which is nice. And again, there's about 142 pages in all. The actual rules to this game are actually a very small portion of the book. I think it's like 5 pages. Yeah, it's about 5 pages of actual rules called Fighting the Battle, as you can see there. These are the actual rules to the game right there, and that's it. Then it goes into some other things. Let's take a look at it and see what's going on. First of all, you got a nice little introduction to version 3 by Phil Barker, the author. A nice design philosophy, which is nice, and what you're going to need to play. I believe it's got 16 different troop types in this game, which are called elements. And they range anything from elephants to knights to cavalry, and this section describes them all. A little background as to what they are and what they represent. And over here we have a description of the ground scale, time scale, the dice. You only need a d6 to play. The army size and representation. All armies in this game in DBA are 12 strong. And the battlefield size, which is typically 2 foot by 2 foot or 32-inch square, whichever you prefer. Then it goes into how to base your figures. This is pretty much the standard basing of ancient miniatures today. The old Wargame Research Group standard, as they call it. For instance, you got cavalry here, which are mounted on, let's see, depending on your size of your figures, in this case, say 15 millimeter, they're on 40 by 30 bases, 40 wide, 30 millimeters deep, and it tells you how many models are on each base. And it covers all the different figure element types for you, like there's pikes, there's blades, auxilia, bows, and so on. It tells you how many figures it suggests you put on them, on the base size, and so on. Something new in this version of the game is the subclassification of elements into solid and fast troop types to better represent their battlefield role, basically. And it's mostly the foot elements that are like that. Like the cavalry are pretty much cav, and that's about it. But your blades, for instance, can be solid or fast. And the number of figures on them also could be different. Let's see what else we got here. We've got a next section here, Battlefield Terrain. Tells you how to make your terrain. All the mandatory pieces and the optional pieces your army can take. And every army has a type of terrain that lists its homeland. For instance, Romans and for example, would typically be a rabble. That would be listed in their army list. And if they are the defender, if you look under a rabble, it'll tell you that they have to take either a built-up area or 2 fields. And then it lists a bunch of optional terrain features which they can take as well, like rivers and hills and fields with enclosures, roads, waterways, scrub, boggy, and so on. And the rules cover in pretty good detail the sizes of these terrain features, what they represent, whether or not they're bad going, rough going, or good going, which is your standard flat open terrain. Then it goes into quite some detail about built-up areas, which are basically things like cities and forts and hamlets and edifices, the denizens who live within cities and things and can actually have an effect on the battle. A minor one, but still it can happen. You could capture a city and have it recaptured and things like that, which is fun. That's a nice touch in DBA. Every army has a camp, typically, unless they're the defender, and they have like a city. But here goes into the camps and where you place them and their sizes and what they represent. Next little section, of course, is the rules. And like I said, it was 5 pages. It's got the sequence of play, how to deploy. It covers everything from moving, tactical moves, group moves, how to cross rivers, interpenetration, what are threat zones and what role do they play in the game. Moving into contact, how do you conform or turn once you're contacted. And it goes into close combat, which is pretty much D6. You add various modifiers, such as the unit or the element type. Like elephants, for instance, when they're fighting against foot, they add 5. If they're fighting against mounted elements, like cavalry and knights, they would only add 4. And then there's modifiers for rear support. Bases are behind each other supporting, like pikes supporting each other, for instance. Flank support factors are things like having solid spears flanked by friendly blades who are also solid. You know, it can give you a flank bonus and things. And then tactical factors, like is your element a general? You know, you get a bonus for that. Are you garrisoning a city or a fort? And in close combat, you get a bonus for that. If you're hitting the flank, or if you're in bad going terrain, it could be a modifier. And then you both sides compare their final results, and it'll come up with an outcome. The loser will look up on the outcomes section here, which is basically if the scores are equal, you look up here. If one side beats the other but doesn't total half or less, you look in here, and so on. So let's just say my legion troops, which are blades, lost against some pikes. So let's say I lost, say, 6-8. Okay, he scored 8, I scored 6. Okay, I come down to here. And this section is, if its total is less than that of the opponent, but more than half, which is what this is, 6-8, I would look up my element type, which would be blades. Where are you? And it says, I am destroyed by knights or scythe chariots, if in good going, or by warband. Otherwise, I just recoil. Okay, it tells me the result of the combat. I carry it out on the table immediately, and we go to the next little combat. So that's a quick rundown of how close combat works. Shooting is similar. Let's see, we've got, it covers destroyed elements, lost elements, fleeing, pursuing, recoiling, pushbacks. All that is detailed here in this 1 page. And then it finally tells you how to win the game, which is basically when a side loses 4 elements, or equivalent to 4 elements, it's going to lose the battle. And that would end the game. But that's not all. Then it goes into what's really fun here, how to play multiplayer games, and what's known as Big Battle DBA, which is basically when you play on a slightly bigger table with 3 times as many elements you normally would play with. Again, normally it's 12 elements in an army. Well, this would be 3 times that. You're basically playing with 3 armies, which is very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. Then it covers Giant DBA, which is basically multiplayer, I believe. I didn't look at this too much, but it does cover bigger battles on a big standard size table, like a 6x4. You can use DBA for that, so that's nice. And it tells you how to fight historical refights, you know, you use the terrain and maps and how many troops elements represent, so it'll be easy to transfer things to your tabletop. And it's got a little rundown on the campaigns. Now, I will say one thing, that the campaign section is kind of a letdown for me, because all the previous versions of DBA included a section on campaign rules. It actually included the campaign rules. And if I could show you right here from the previous editions, this is what it looked like. You know, you had this little hub type map, and it explained how it works and covered things like resources, how to do battle, supply, movement on the map, invasion, results of a battle and how it affects the campaign, and how you could have multiple players playing as well, how you conquer, tributary rulers, sieges. It was all covered. It was only like maybe, what, 5 pages? Boom. Maybe 4 pages. And they left that out of this, but they did include this one little section which mentions this style of campaign gaming. But yeah, that's kind of a letdown. But still, I do have these rules, and I'm happy with that. I'll probably just continue using them from the previous edition. No problem. Now, here's where we get to a really good section of the DBA rules, the new version anyway. And in here, we have something that really changes things, and it is basically a diagram section explaining the rules from the game. And this is so useful if you've never played DBA before. And even if you have played DBA, this really brings a lot of clarity to the rules and the author's intent behind the rules. And it covers everything from how you make contact. I mean, quite literally, I looked at this for the first time, and I went through the diagrams before I even started reading the rules. And immediately, things clicked in my head like, oh, that's how it's done. So this is a really big section of the rules, a definite plus. And after looking through this a couple times, it's very enlightening. I mean, you could get a lot just by looking at the diagrams alone. You could catch on to this game very quickly. So this is a definite plus. And again, it covers everything in the diagrams. I think it's like 7-8 pages or more. There's quite a few here, as you can see. Oh, there's like a dozen pages of nothing but diagrams. So this was a huge plus. I think the author really went out of his way to take what players wanted, and more diagrams and examples of play was one of those things we wanted. And there they are. Combat examples, outcomes, and yeah, this version of the game is very clear because of this alone, on top of the rules being written in a much more concise way. And that's it. So there you go, 30 pages into it. You got the rules, descriptions, unit types, playing area, and then it comes to the meat of the book, which is the army list section. Now, I didn't count these, but I'm guessing that maybe there's about 300 armies in here, not including different versions of the same army. But there is a lot. And they're divided up into 4 separate sections, basically, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which cover various geographical and time periods. Like army lists from section 1 are from a specific time period and geographic area. For instance, section 2 covers the armies of early Rome, their enemies that they fought, like the Ptolemaic armies and so on and so forth. If you can get a look at one of these army lists. And as you can see, there's a little more meat to each of the armies as well. Not only does it, like for instance, let's look at this. We got the list 2, number 31, Hellenistic Greek. It tells you the time period that it covers, which is 278 BC to 146. Then a little historical background, mentioning its leaders and battles it fought, and any specific notes on what troops might be represented by. Like it says here at the end, Soloi can be armed with javelins, bows, or sling. So if you're modeling your miniatures, you know how to do it with your Soloi. Your Soloi, you're basically your little two-figure per base skirmishers, basically. If we look at some of these armies, here's all the different types that are in the Hellenistic Greek list. And you pick one of these to represent your army with. And they're divided into area, like the Spartan army from 278 to 226 BC. Then you got the Spartan army from 225 to 223 BC. And then again, another Spartan Army version, which is 222 to 195. Each one has their own little number and code. And let's say we were looking at this army here, the Boeotian Army, 245 to 146 BC, tells you that it has one general, who's a cavalry element. It has one light horse element, 6 phalanx units, which are pike. Then it's got auxilia and soloi in there on top of that. It makes up 12 elements. And usually there's options here, so you don't always have the same troop type. Sometimes you could swap out, and it'll tell you, you could swap out a couple pikes for a different troop type, for instance, if the army typically done that. Then it goes into its terrain type, if it's the defender. In this case, the Boeotians are a rabble. It also lists their aggression factor, which is a modifier. At the beginning of a battle, both players roll a d6, and they add their sides, their army's aggression factor. And the high roll becomes the attacker. The low roll is the defender. And as the defender gets to lay out the terrain, and his terrain choices are based on his terrain type, which in this case would be a rabble. So that's how that works. Very nice information. Then it has a nice listing of enemies, all the different historical enemies or plausible historical enemies that this particular army fought against or could fight against. And finally, it lists allies, the possible allies you could add to this army, which is in general a third of the army can be taken as allies. And they're basically chosen from another list, in this case, list 231J, which is basically another Hellenistic army, which is this one here, the Aetolian army. And you can draw troops from here. So that's the way the army lists work, which is pretty nice. And another big feature is it does have an index, not only for the rules, but it has several separate indexes for all the army lists, making it very convenient to find armies. They have a geographic index to the army lists, like Africa. Here's all the lists that are in the Africa area, their numbers and the name of the army. Here's the American ones. Here's an alphabetical index to the army list, where everything is literally indexed based on the alphabetical order. You can see there's a lot of armies in this. And I think there's another version of the index, which is an alphabetical index to the rules. So I guess there's only 2 for the army lists. Well, yeah. So there you go. That's DBA, the look of it. Very, very nice. Solid hardcover book. I love it. I've played this game over the years for a long time. I've had my frustrating moments with it, and I always enjoyed it. But I definitely switched over to other rules for a while. But this excited me. I picked it up, took the chance, because it was so enjoyable, and it's so easy to get into. It's highly recommended by me. That's all I could say, folks. Particularly this version. If you wanted to ever get into Ancients gaming without a huge investment in models and painting guides and terrain, this is the way to go. This is basically an introduction to Ancients gaming, but a lot of people, including myself, get hooked on this because, you know, you would think, oh, it's an introduction, you're going to buy something else and get deeper into it. You could. But once you play this game, you realize this is a very deep game in its own right. And with options like Giant Battle DBA and Big Battle DBA and campaigns, it's marvelous. You know, it's perfect. Especially if you're new to Ancients gaming or your budget is limited. For instance, if you don't like playing skirmish games, you like battle games, tactical level battles, this is a good alternative to playing a skirmish game. You have just as many miniatures as in a skirmish game, but you're actually playing with units or elements and playing battles, you know, so that's a nice plus. Yeah, and like I said, the game they're very fast-moving battles. It usually takes under an hour to play a battle, typically. What else was there? Another thing is it's easy to collect an army for. 40, 50, 60 figures, easy. There's your collection. And if you wanted to try out different armies, and that's one of the advantages of Ancients gaming, is that there's so many armies you could play. You could just go crazy here and just have collections from all kinds of different periods if you wanted. All kinds of Romans and Hittites and Egyptians and the Middle Ages, 100 Years' War, Galatians, all kinds of things you could draw from here to experiment with and have fun with. And if you want, you can always build the army bigger than, this game and play another set of rules if you wanted, or play Big Battle DBA, whatever. This is a set of rules which you can learn in probably under 20 minutes and play a game in under an hour with 50 or 60 models and a 2x2 square table. It's been around for, I think, over 25 years. This set of rules has been around and played. So this is like one of the most well play-tested games that you can get on the market today in wargaming. It's very popular. It's played in tournaments as well as one-offs and historical game battles as well. And you get all these little fun trinkets you can buy too. Like I got these from LitGo. DBA 3.0. That's a little measuring device. There's one for ranges, for shooting artillery. And there's a few other little trinkets that you can get too. Like this represents base width for 15 millimeter. And so on. So there's all kinds of extras you can get along with this game. There's even some companies that manufacture DBA starter armies. So you like Corvus Belli. They sell them. You could buy one for like 30, 40, 50 bucks. There's an entire army for you to paint up. Boom. You're all set. So it's not hard to get into this game, De Bellis Antiquitatis. In fact, this set of rules in particular is a gateway to Ancients gaming. If you ever considered getting into Ancients or Middle Ages or early Renaissance period wargaming, this is a really good way to go. De Bellis Antiquitatis. What else can I say? That's pretty much everything in a nutshell without going into any more detail regarding the rules and how it plays. Price-wise, I think I picked this up in America for like 40 bucks, $45, something like that. But for the quality and what you're getting, I think it's worth it. It's definitely worth it if you want to get into Ancients or want something fast-moving and fast-playing that has historical outcomes and feels like an actual battle, a linear-style battle. Yeah, this is the way to go. I mean, just one look here, and you can see I have two armies right there of Republican Romans and a successor army. And that's it. Those are two armies. Not with every option there. Obviously, well, actually, I do have some models missing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's only 8. It should be 12, plus any options. But this gives you an idea of what you're looking at. And so there you go, folks. That's De Bellis Antiquitatis. Highly recommended. I definitely say it's one of the better sets of rules, if not the rules, for Ancients gaming that you should have in your collection. So there you go, folks. Hope you enjoyed.